On a bright evening when families gathered in living rooms across America, the television flickered with a show that promised answers but carried more shadows than light. The program was titled, "My Husband Is Not Gay." At first glance, it seemed like a quirky special, perhaps even a harmless curiosity. Yet beneath the polished graphics and the cheerful host, it was a stage built to display men who were living a life that was not their own. It was a push disguised as entertainment. Among the carefully selected guests sat Ethan Hale. He was 28, with a kind of clean-cut appearance that magazine covers praised as the ideal Mormon husband. His dark suit was perfectly pressed, his hair neatly parted, his posture straight. Cameras adored him. The audience leaned forward, ready to watch a man who embodied everything his faith told him he should be. To them, he was proof that the system worked, that discipline could conquer desire. But when the spotlight settled, Ethan's hands trembled ever so slightly. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the rows of strangers beyond the glass. Then, with a voice that cracked in the silence, he spoke. "I am attracted to men," he confessed. "But in our church, we call it something else. We call it SSA, same-sex attraction. We don't say gay." The studio held its breath. His wife, Hannah, sitting close beside him, gave a rehearsed nod, her smile tight as porcelain. To the producers, it was just another soundbite, a clip to be edited for shock value. Yet what no one realized, not the viewers, not even Ethan himself, was that this moment would ripple far beyond the broadcast. That fragile confession would ignite a conversation buried for decades. And the man trembling under the studio lights was about to become the one who dared to break the silence that had ruled his community for generations. For Ethan, every second under those lights felt like standing on a knife's edge. He had lived years pretending his heart could be reshaped by prayer, by scripture, by family duty. He believed that if he avoided one word, if he never dared to call himself gay, then maybe he could keep the life expected of him. But now, with the world watching, the truth slipped out in a way he could no longer contain. He didn't know it yet, but this single night would cost him more than he imagined. It would strip away his safety, his home, and the fragile trust of the woman who had stood beside him. Yet it would also hand him something his soul had long craved: freedom. As the cameras kept rolling, Ethan tried to steady his breath. He looked down at his fingers, gripping the edge of the chair, and felt the weight of generations pressing down. He was not just a husband, not just a father, not just a church member. He was a man who had hidden himself so deeply that even he sometimes believed the mask was real. But masks crack under light, and on this night, the world had begun to see through. It is often said that truth is a burden, but the greater burden is the lie we carry for the sake of others. The silence we force ourselves into while our heart cries to be heard. Ethan was stepping into that space now, between who he was and who he had been told to be. And though fear clung to every breath, the seeds of change had already been sown. This was not just his story. It was the story of countless others who watched that program from the shadows of their own lives, hearts pounding, seeing themselves in his quivering voice. And while Ethan's confession seemed small, almost clinical, to them it was thunder. Stay with us, because what unfolded from that confession would shake not only his marriage and his community, but the image of faith itself. This is Heart Stories, where we tell the stories others are afraid to speak. If you believe no one should live a lie just to be accepted, make sure to subscribe and follow along, because Ethan's journey is only beginning. And perhaps the lesson that hides even in this first chapter is simple silence may protect the image of a community, but it suffocates the soul of the individual. Tonight, one man's voice had cracked that silence, and nothing would ever sound the same again. From the outside, Ethan Hale's life looked like a framed picture of stability. A wife who carried herself with gentle grace, 2 children with wide eyes and innocent laughter, and a house that mirrored the quiet orderliness of their faith. Neighbors admired the Hale family. Church leaders pointed to them as an example of what devotion and discipline could create. To anyone glancing from the pews on Sunday, Ethan was the proof that righteousness led to happiness. Hannah, his wife, believed this too, or at least she wanted to. Her faith was unwavering, her loyalty to the teachings of their church absolute. When cameras captured her face for the program, she held her smile, though it trembled at the edges. "My husband isn't gay," she told the audience, her voice rehearsed and firm. "He only has SSA, same-sex attraction. That's different." She believed repeating the phrase would keep their world intact, that labeling it with a softer name could protect them from the judgment that haunted every whisper in their community. Ethan sat beside her, jaw tight, nodding when expected. He knew the lines as well as she did. Their marriage was less about affection and more about survival, both of them clinging to a system that demanded perfection at any cost. His day unfolded like clockwork: a press suit, a role in the church's administration, the weight of expectation carried in each measured step. By day, he spoke with confidence about faith, about leadership, about resisting temptation. By night, he stood in front of his mirror, unable to look himself in the eyes. The reflection always betrayed him. The man in the mirror was handsome, disciplined, composed, yet behind that flawless exterior, Ethan saw the truth that no scripture could erase. His attraction, his longing, his identity, none of it disappeared no matter how much he prayed or pushed it aside. Each evening, when the children were asleep and Hannah retreated into her own silent prayers, Ethan would linger alone. The hum of the refrigerator became the only sound in the room, and the weight of pretending pressed down harder than the stillness. He carried the fear that everything could shatter with a single slip. One glance too long at another man, one careless word overheard, one rumor whispered in the wrong ear. If that happened, he would lose his family, his standing, his place in the only world he had ever known. And so he chose silence, believing that the cost of speaking his truth was too high to pay. For Hannah, the silence was both comfort and shame. She convinced herself that her husband's confessions were simply struggles, burdens she could help him carry, proof of her devotion. She smiled at church gatherings, accepted compliments about their perfect family, and forced herself to ignore the unease she felt when Ethan's eyes avoided hers in moments of intimacy. She clung to the belief that protecting the image of their marriage was the same as protecting their faith. This was the paradox of Ethan's life. The more he conformed, the less he recognized himself. His existence was a performance written by others, applauded by a congregation that never saw the man beneath the costume. To question it would mean betrayal. To break from it would mean exile. And yet, deep inside, Ethan already knew the cost of continuing. He could feel the erosion of his spirit, the slow suffocation that came from living a lie crafted for public approval. A life lived only for the expectations of others is a fragile one. It may appear flawless to the outside world, but inside it crumbles like dust in the wind. Ethan's silence was not only shaping his own destiny, it was teaching his children a dangerous lesson: that hiding one's truth was more valuable than living it. The exterior was perfect, too perfect. And perfection, as Ethan was beginning to understand, can become a prison when it leaves no room for honesty. The cameras returned, brighter and more probing than before, and with them came a new set of trials. The producers framed the show as if it were a lesson in discipline, a display of how men with SSA could resist their urges and live righteous lives. In one scene, Ethan and the others sat in a circle, Bibles open in their laps, reciting verses meant to cleanse their thoughts. The host asked each man to share how he handled moments of temptation. The words fell into the air like chains, binding them to a script they could not escape. When it was Ethan's turn, he forced a smile that never reached his eyes. He spoke of prayer, of memorized scripture, of strategies to avoid looking too long at another man. The audience clapped politely, yet inside, every word burned his throat. What should have been faith sounded hollow, like a song sung without melody. He felt his lungs tighten as if the air itself resisted his lie. The program intensified. Viewers were told about the so-called danger scale, a ranking system these men used to measure the threat of attraction. If a handsome man walked by, they were to confess the level of risk, as if desire could be graded like a school test. When the question was posed to Ethan, laughter rippled from the audience. He laughed too, because that was what was expected. But inside, he was breaking. The more he pretended, the more the truth thundered in his chest, demanding release. Then came the moment that would unravel him. The producers introduced what they called an experiment. A young woman was brought in, seated across from Ethan, presented as a match who could demonstrate the success of resisting his so-called SSA. The room leaned forward. The camera zoomed in. Hannah gripped Ethan's arm, her nails pressing into his sleeve, a silent command not to falter. But it wasn't the woman's presence that unsettled him. Across the set stood Tom, another participant in the program, a man whose quiet strength had caught Ethan's attention long before. As Ethan spoke the lines expected of him, his eyes betrayed him. He glanced at Tom, again and again, unable to disguise the longing that pulsed beneath the surface. The woman spoke, but Ethan's gaze lingered elsewhere, and in that moment, the performance cracked. The audience noticed, the crew noticed, and most painfully of all, Hannah noticed. The camera did not need to follow his eyes. The truth had already seeped through the screen. Ethan sat frozen, his body rigid, his breath unsteady. He had spent years convincing himself he could suppress his heart, but that single glance exposed everything. The pressure was unbearable. He wanted to answer the question honestly when the host asked, "If society accepted it, would you live according to your feelings?" His lips parted, the words trembling on the edge, but Hannah's hand clamped tighter on his arm. A grip not of love, but of fear. She would not allow him to speak. The silence screamed louder than words. When the segment ended, applause filled the studio. To the audience, it was just another act in a peculiar show. To Ethan, it was suffocation. He realized that the cost of silence was not just his own despair, it was also complicity in a lie that harmed others like him. His eyes met Tom's one last time as the lights dimmed. In that unspoken exchange, Ethan recognized something profound: the truth may bring loss, but pretending was already destroying him piece by piece. Crises do not always come with loud confrontations. Sometimes they arrive in the quiet collapse of the self, in the recognition that the life you are protecting is already slipping away. For Ethan, that night marked the breaking point. His family, his church, his reputation, none of it could outweigh the truth that his heart had declared with a single glance. And perhaps that is the lesson buried in the silence of that studio. Denying who you are does not erase the truth. It only delays the pain until it becomes unbearable. The studio had emptied, but the weight of the lights lingered on Ethan Hale's skin like heat that refused to fade. The applause, the scripted reassurances, the carefully orchestrated smiles, all of it dissolved once the camera stopped. What remained was the echo of silence, thick and suffocating, as though the entire room held its breath. Hannah's tears spilled quietly as she avoided his gaze, clutching her handbag as if it were a shield. Tom stood near the exit, frozen, unable to decide whether to step forward or vanish. The producers shuffled papers, whispering frantically, their plan unraveling before their eyes. It was in this moment, away from the staged perfection, that Ethan felt a surge unlike any he had known before. His heart pounded with both fear and clarity. He had carried the mask for years, believing it was armor, but in truth it had been a coffin. With trembling hands, he stood, his voice rising not for the audience at home, but for the truth that had been buried too long. "My name is Ethan Hale," he said, steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I am not sick. I am not broken. I am gay." The words struck like thunder. Chairs scraped against the floor as people turned toward him. The producer's clipboard slipped from his hand, papers scattering across the carpet. Hannah gasped, her sobs breaking free in sharp bursts. Tom's eyes widened, stunned, yet filled with something that looked like recognition. The room erupted, some voices sharp with anger, others thick with shock. For the Mormon leaders who had attended, it was betrayal. They muttered about disgrace, about excommunication, about the shame he had brought upon their church. To them, Ethan had abandoned the path of salvation. Yet beyond those walls, in the world that watched through leaked footage, his words struck differently. A crew member, shaken by what they had witnessed, released the clip online. Within hours, it spread like wildfire, carried across phones, laptops, and televisions. Millions of strangers heard the confession that had cost him everything. And instead of mockery, many responded with awe. "This is not SS," they wrote. "This is a man telling the truth." The cost was swift. Ethan returned home to find the locks changed, his position within the church stripped, his community doors slammed shut. The house where his children played no longer welcomed him. The friendships he once nurtured vanished into silence. Yet as he stood in the emptiness, he felt lighter than he ever had. For the first time in his life, he was not pretending. He had spoken the words aloud, and no power could force them back into hiding. Freedom often arrives hand in hand with loss. Ethan learned that truth. He grieved what was taken his family's embrace, the comfort of belonging, the image of a perfect life. But he also understood that what he gained was beyond measure. He gained himself. The clip continued to circle the globe, drawing messages of support from those who had long believed they were alone. His story became a mirror in which countless others saw their own faces reflected. What the producers had designed as a spectacle of control had become a declaration of liberation. And there lies the quiet education within Ethan's revelation. Truth may dismantle the walls you thought were home, but it also builded doors for others to walk through. Silence might keep you safe for a time, but it keeps others chained in the same darkness. By stepping into the light, even when it cost him everything, Ethan gave others permission to believe that they too deserved to live. A year passed, but the echo of Ethan Hale's words had not faded. The clip that once cost him everything had carved a new path. From whispered conversations in small towns to open debates in city halls, his confession had ignited a dialogue that could no longer be silenced. What was once dismissed as SSA had now been named for what it truly was: identity, not illness. Ethan, stripped of his old life, had become a reluctant symbol for those who had lived in shadows. When the invitation arrived, he almost did not believe it. The GLAAD Awards, an evening that celebrated visibility, courage, and truth, wanted him as a guest of honor. He had no home in the church anymore, but here in a hall filled with voices that had fought the same battles, he was welcomed. As he stepped onto the stage, the lights that once humiliated him now illuminated him with dignity. His suit was still crisp, his posture still straight, but this time his smile was unforced, born not of duty, but of relief. The crowd rose in applause, not for the mask he once wore, but for the man who had dared to remove it. He spoke slowly, each word carrying the weight of a life lived in silence and the freedom of no longer hiding. "A year ago, I was on a program meant to shame me," he began, "but the world turned that moment into something else. I stand here not as an experiment, not as a husband trying to prove discipline, but as myself. My name is Ethan Hale. I am gay, and I am not afraid anymore." Then came the twist that none in the audience expected. His voice softened as he looked toward the side of the stage. "There is something I must share. The truth is, sir, the person I love was never Hannah. It is Tom, and this time we will not hide." The room erupted. Applause thundered through the hall. Tears streamed down faces. Strangers embraced as if they too had been freed. Tom walked out, hesitant at first, but when Ethan reached for his hand, he took it. Together, they stood, two men no longer bound by silence. The same cameras that once sought to exploit him now captured the image of a couple daring to exist openly. Ethan knew there were still those who would condemn him, communities that would brand him a traitor, families who would refuse to understand. But standing on that stage, hand in hand with Tom, he no longer feared rejection. What mattered was that he was living truthfully. He had traded exile for authenticity, and in doing so, he discovered that love thrives not in secrecy but in light. The audience saw more than a love story. They saw resilience, the power of speaking when silence suffocates, the beauty of choosing authenticity over approval. Ethan's journey revealed that freedom is rarely given, it is claimed, often at great price, but worth every sacrifice. And so the lesson lingered long after the applause faded. No community, no tradition, no doctrine should demand that a person bury who they are to be worthy of belonging. Because in the end, the only life worth living is the one lived honestly. As Ethan and Tom walked down from the stage, their hands still locked together, the moment became more than a celebration. It was a statement, a promise, a future finally claimed. What about you if you were in Ethan's place? Would you choose silence to protect an image? Or would you risk everything to live your truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe stories like Ethan's deserve to be heard, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and join us here at Heart Stories, where we tell the stories others are too afraid to speak.